Welcome back to Sports Cards and a Cup of Joe. This is your host, Joe Davis, and I am very excited to be back today as today I'm going to open with a great big thank you to each of you who listen. We have now passed over 15,000 downloads on the podcast side as well as downloads other places, but just on Sports Cards and a Cup of Joe, we have over 15,000 downloads. And that's thanks to each and every one of you, and I appreciate your support. And thank you for the 1,000-plus downloads on my other show, the weekly show, the Joe Davis Show. And today, I'm going to ask a really big question, and that is to grade or not to grade. That is the question, to paraphrase Willie Shakespeare. So the reason I bring this topic up is because PSA has just had another price increase as of last Friday. Now, it's minimal. For the bulk service, it's a $2 a card increase. So whether you go direct with PSA or you go through Got Baseball Cards, my company, we now charge $22 if you were doing 20 or more cards. And of course, we actually cover the shipping back and forth to PSA, whereas when you do that directly, you're paying them for both of those. But here's the big picture. Another price increase indicates what? It indicates the incredible volume that they're doing. And I often get asked, well, why in the world are they going up there making so much money? My best guess, and I've been there, done that a few times in my history with PSA since 1998, especially over the last 5 years, when we've seen price increases, it was typically, or I should say, it's pretty much always indicative of the challenges they were facing with volume. PSA has fallen the furthest behind in many years. I just got an email from my rep telling us how now it was taking them multiple weeks just to get shipments opened. So value bulk shipments are sometimes taking like 3 weeks just to be opened before they're ever checked in. Now, those who don't know, back in the day, when PSA shut down grading during the explosion during the pandemic, PSA at one point fell to 18 months behind. We literally had some submitters who passed away waiting on their orders to come back. Not kidding. And the trends that we're seeing are showing a similar steady slowdown in turnaround times. Now, don't misquote me. I don't think we're ever going to get back to being 18 months behind. But my point is, PSA is taking some proactive steps, as I like to say, to balance manageability of volume with profitability. So, in theory, you would think, okay, we're going to go up 10%, $2 a card. And the thought process might be, maybe that will slow things down a little bit, but we will gross a couple of dollars more per card, which will allow us to take those extra profits, hire more graders, hire more processors, whatever, and then you can grow the company more. The other point would be, if that 10% increase slows the volume down a little, then at least you're making a little more money on the ones you are getting. So in theory, you could get 10% fewer submissions, but you're making a little bit on all the ones you do get, which adds back to your profit, even though you've lost some from getting fewer submissions. All of that you would think would make sense. However, what I've seen in the past is often when there's a slight increase in grading costs, what happens instead is grading volume increases. And the reason is many of those submitting cards to PSA see that small increase, and then FOMO kicks in, the fear of missing out on getting the cards graded at the new price point, because the assumption is it may get even worse. And often that has been the case. In the past, I've seen a small price increase that really did nothing to slow the volume down, followed by a larger price increase. Now, those were different times, even though it was only a few years ago. PSA has far more capability to handle far more volume now than they did a few years ago. And speaking of volume, looking at gemrate.com, in the last 30 days, as I record this, PSA has processed 1,521,840 cards. The 30 days before that, it was 1,666,591. So that's an average of nearly 51,000 cards. Currently, an average of nearly 51,000 cards per day over the last 30 days. That's a lot of plastic. That's a lot of labor. That's a lot of shipping. So when I get to this question of to grade or not to grade, I truly want to help each of you think this through. Now, you may say, but Joe, you're a group submitter. A huge part of your business is handling submissions for PSA and the other three leading grading companies. Are you actually going to tell us not to grade some stuff? Yes, I am. And the reason is we are definitely in a junk slab era, in the sense that a lot of stuff coming back, and again, we typically get thousands of cards back in a given week when PSA is cranking them out, because we submit thousands of cards per week. And a lot of those cards are not worth the cost of grading. Now, we offer a pre-screening service, as you've heard me share before, and we offer that to help submitters save money and to help submitters not send in cards that they won't come out on financially. But many submitters don't use that service. They just want the cards graded, or they've looked at them themselves, whatever. So every week we have submissions come back, and I don't see many of them. I'm involved with other parts of the business, but occasionally I'm brought in to answer questions, or a submitter wants to sell his graded cards to us, or he wants to consign them or whatever. So I do get to see a lot of cards that come back. And there's a lot of cases where grading those particular cards did not work out financially. So I want to spend this episode trying to help each of you think through, if you're grading cards, what you're submitting, why you're submitting it, does your potential resale make sense, etc. I know I have personally graded tens of thousands of cards, probably hundreds of thousands of cards over the years. And I own thousands of graded cards. So I too have graded plenty of cards that didn't make sense. Sometimes it was the timing. Remember when I talked about the 18-month delay in getting cards back? Well, I can tell you there was a lot of stuff I sent in that was worth grading, and then 18 months later when they came back, it didn't look like such a great move. Why? Because so many others had graded them. Maybe that player who was a budding young star when I sent the cards in was now back in the minors or out of baseball, whatever. Or I remember some NBA prospects that I graded, and I don't even think they were with a team by the time I got them back. So there are a lot of factors that can play in. But some of this comes out of a discussion I had with a potential submitter just this past week. He brought in several Ziploc bags of cards to grade, and he said, this bag here is worth $25 to $50. This bag here is worth $50 to $100, and this final bag is worth $100 or more per card. I looked through them, and I didn't see a single card worth over $3 raw card value. And he said, oh, but I've looked them up on PSA, and this is what they're worth. And this was all mainly commons and minor stars, mainly commons from the 80s and 90s. And I told him, I said, well, you're right. If you happen to get a PSA 10 on this 1986 Topps card, it might be worth $50 or $100, because getting PSA 10s on 1986 Topps baseball is next to impossible. I've never gotten one. Now, I haven't graded a huge amount of them, but I've never gotten one for myself or a submitter. They're incredibly tough. They're almost always off center, and they have at least one dark colored border. So they're incredibly tough. And so I went through all 3 Ziploc bags, and we didn't submit a single card. Hundreds of cards I looked through. We didn't submit a single one. Because I told this gentleman, you're probably wasting money here, because on those particular cards, even if you get a 9, which is tough to get on 80s and 90s stuff, I said, even if you get a 9, you're probably going to break even at best after grading. And the only way you're going to come out ahead is getting a 10. So if you're sitting there, and some of you are saying, well, wait a minute, Joe. A few episodes ago, you talked about estate planning, and you told me how I needed to get my cards graded. I agree. I agree with the old version of myself from a few episodes ago. However, you still have to be wise in which cards you choose to grade, because some will pay off, some will not. So I'm going to give you some general rules that I follow when I buy a collection and I'm thinking about which cards should be graded, or things for my own collection. And let me actually go there first. If you have cards in your personal collection and you know you want them graded long term, you want to own them in a PSA graded holder or any of the other companies, but today's discussion is primarily focused on PSA because of their price increase. So you have cards that you want graded by PSA. Here is my opinion. If you're sitting on them and they're ungraded right now, if you want to grade cards for your personal collection and you don't care what the grades are, you just want them done, I would advise you to go ahead and get them graded. And the reason is, I do not foresee a price decrease anytime in the near future. The demand for grading continues to grow, specifically for PSA continues to grow, and they have had to raise prices, again, my opinion, in an effort to manage how many they can manage and to do it in a profitable way, because they are continuing to ramp up. They're continuing to add other locations. They're now opening up in Europe. They've now moved their ticket grading division to Texas, near Beckett, by the way. But they're continuing to ramp up, continuing to spend money. So all of these factors play into the fact that I don't foresee a price decrease from PSA anytime in the near future. So if you've been holding your cards on the sideline saying, I'm going to wait till they go back to $7 a card, it's not going to happen. Okay, mark my words, it's not going to happen. Without an utter collapse of the entire card industry, that's not going to happen. If anything, this small increase is a precursor to an additional increase. Again, my opinion, I don't know anything from PSA. No one's told me this is the first of multiple increases. I just know that this increase is so small that I don't think it's going to affect the volume at all. Meaning, if they still can't manage the volume because they're now about 4 months behind on the bulk service, and if that number keeps getting worse and worse as far as them falling further and further behind, that's probably the only way to quickly slow down the volume is to have another price increase. So if you've got cards from your own collection, you want them done, go ahead and submit them. Don't wait any longer. It'll probably just cost you more money in the future. All right, now we're through talking about your personal collection for this episode. Let's focus on cards you're grading because you want a financial return on them. Here are some things to keep in mind. I often start with raw card value. If the card books for $1 or $2, $3, whatever, on the really low end, let's just say under $10, you are at great risk when you're sending that in for grading. If you're spending 4 or 5 times as much on grading as the raw card value that the card has, that's a very risky move. Now, I typically like to tell collectors, look at your collection and look at the stuff that's selling raw for at least $15, $20. Then if you're putting now 22 or so into it, again, that's if you're doing volume. It's a little pricier without that volume. But if you're doing, say, 20 or more cards at a time so that you can get it down to $22, and you're using a service like ours and you're paying to pre-screen them so that you're not wasting money on ones that shouldn't be graded, to give yourselves a chance at getting a lot of high grades, you still want to have your minimum book value, in my opinion, typically at least in the teens. I don't buy collections and look at $10 cards and say, oh, yeah, we need to spend twice that much to grade it. Don't get me wrong, I've done it. Back in the day, during the pandemic, during the boom, I was grading a lot of $2, $3, $4, $5 cards. But again, grading back then, before PSA kept going up in price, grading was much cheaper. So we're looking at different scales now as far as the cost just to get the card graded. So I look at what is the book value. Also, of course, you've got to look at condition because this is going to vary a lot with vintage versus modern. Now, if you've got a vintage card and the near mint book value is $100, but the corners are all worn, the edges, there's a light crease, that's probably a $15 or $20 card. So you can't just look at book value. You've got to also evaluate the condition. Trust me, we have a showcase filled with vintage stars and modern stars and high numbers and stuff like that from 1948 through, I believe it's the early 80s, and we have sections for each year, and a lot of those cards book for over $100, but in the condition they're in, they don't warrant being graded. So you have to weigh the condition as well as the book value. Now, if you've got modern cards, from the last, let's say, 25 years, well, even longer than that, I'd say back to the mid-'80s even. Let's say the last 40 years. And they book for that $15 or $20 or $30. Or let's say it's a Tony Gwynn rookie, Ryan Sandberg rookie, Um, Roger Clemens, well, that's not a great example. His 84 Fleer update's worth way more than a few dollars, but you know what I'm saying. Good names, Hall of Famers, but their rookie cards were mass produced. 84 Topps Don Mattingly is an example. Doesn't book for a lot, but if you can get mint and gem mint grades on it, it's a very valuable card. But you've just got to look at them so closely. You got to look at the centering. You got to look at the edges. You got to look at the corners. You got to check out the surface, front and back, because otherwise you can be wasting a lot of money. And the more the price increases, the greater likelihood there is that you come out upside down. And I hate it when I see collectors get cards back when they didn't ask for screening. I had someone recently get back a 4 on a modern card. And I had told him, I said, would you like us to review these? Because understand, we often get thousands of cards in a week to go through. And he was like, nope, it's good. Just go with it. And then he was very frustrated with the low grade. And I told him, I was like, I'm sorry. I wish we had looked through those, but we did what you asked. You gave them to us and said, just send them no matter what. So you got to be very careful. Yes, you can get a 4 on a modern card that came right out of the pack. I've seen brand new Prism cards, brand new Optic cards. I've seen cards come right out of the pack with small creases right out of the pack. So you've got to be very careful. So it's so disappointing. It's disheartening for me when I see a collector who is disappointed in the grades they get back. So this is why we take such pride in the service we offer to help collectors with that. So again, we've talked a little bit about condition. If it's modern, you want a mint card. You want a card that is mint, it's centered, sharp corners, sharp edges, great eye appeal, everything. It needs the works. Needs to have it all going on for that card to make sense. Even if it's a pricier card, if you've got a $100 modern card with a bad corner, there is no point in sending that in unless it's like an auto and you just want it slab to authenticate the auto. Because if anything, you're going to devalue your resale, because the modern card with a bad corner, say it's a $100 card, it's going to grade a 6 or 7. It's going to be worth half of the near mint, half of the quote book value. So, and you've put the money into the grading. So you got to be very, very careful. I am literally at a point where I am trying to be both an advocate for grading, because I strongly believe in the positive benefits of having cards graded. But at the same time, I am more so trying to be an advocate for collectors to be very careful in what you are sending in. I can tell you, I have revisited my own submission practices over the last few months. Not so much for my PC, because I've personally graded a lot of vintage. As y'all know, I love the vintage non-sports, and I'm sitting here as I record this looking at a bunch of 1935 and 1937 Mickey Mouse cards that graded, most of them between a 1 and a 3. But you know what? I love them. They're great looking cards. These I happen to have graded with SGC because these particular cards look really cool in the black holder, and I actually used them because I wanted them back quickly. And my resale on those doesn't matter because I'm not reselling them. But my point is, when you're grading for your PC, it's one thing. When you're grading for resale, you got to take it very seriously. And when I'm grading for resale, I am being more and more picky about what I send in. I'm being more and more picky about condition. There was recently a batch of cards I bought thousands of a particular card, well-known card, back from the 90s, and I used to send, say out of every 100, I would typically send 60 or 70 of them. This time, we were much more strict going through them. I sent in a much smaller percentage because I'm just shooting for the absolute best grades on these, because grading costs have gone up, resale value not so much, and I have to be more and more careful. So the things I deal with from the resale side also apply to each of you who are grading for resale. So I encourage you to scrutinize your cards more carefully. Look at completed sales more closely before you send them in, even if you're sending them to us. I don't want you wasting your money. I want every grading experience to be a positive experience, and hopefully to be a financially beneficial experience, unless it's things you're just grading because you love a particular set, you love a particular player, and you just want the cards done. I get it. I'm sitting on a lot of stuff that I graded for my own collection. I'm not worried about the resale. But when you're talking about the resale, please be careful. Please don't send us a bunch of dollar cards from the 90s or 80s or 70s or any, I started to say you can send us some 52 tops, but if you send us 52 tops, none of those are dollar cards. So that's a moot point. So please be careful. Examine your cards more closely than ever. Weigh the potential benefit versus the potential downside. There are times I've taken a lot of risks in the industry, and there are times that I'm much more careful. And the pricier that grading becomes, the more and more careful I am, the more selective I am as to what I send in, both condition-wise but also player-wise. I ask myself, what do I project the resale will be in a worst-case scenario? And what I mean by that is, if I've examined the cards or my team has examined the cards, typically the very worst-case scenario is going to be an 8, usually a 9 or 10. If we've passed it, we are so strict on modern cards that the great majority get 9s and 10s. Are we perfect? No. Are the PSA graders perfect? No. Yes, we have way more experience examining cards than most of their graders. That's what happens when a company grows the way they have grown. But my point is, I weigh a lot of things. Like right now, when it's taking 4 months to get cards back at the bulk level, I also have to think about the timing of, when are these cards going to come back? Will this young quarterback still be the starting quarterback? Just because he's trending and in demand right now, we've seen the league eat up young quarterbacks for lunch over the last few years. So many. I could have done, if I was doing the show years ago, I could have done week after week about how hot XYZ quarterback was, and then 2 months later I could have said, oh yeah, he's out of the league now, or he's third string now on another team. That's just what happens with NFL quarterbacks. So be careful. Be careful. So hopefully this has been maybe not eye-opening, but hopefully this has helped some of you look at what you want to grade and think about why you want to do it, should you do it, when you should do it, and what the expectations should be, both your potential upside and downside. Now, big money cards are often a different story. There's autographs, jerseys, low-numbered stuff. A lot of times it just makes sense to get that done. If it's going to help you with the resale, if it's going to make it an easier transaction to resell it, even though the card got an 8, whatever, that's a different story. I'm talking mainly to those of you who are focused on like the sub $100 items in your collection, and you're trying to make sense out of whether they're still worth grading. So hopefully this has been helpful. Again, our team at gotbaseballcards.com is always willing and ready to help you make decisions, help give you guidance. But hopefully this has given you a little bit of a big picture look at this recent change in the industry, the price increase, and what there might be to come in the future. So thanks for listening, everyone. Remember today, my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ loves you so much. My decision to give my life to him many, many years ago was the greatest, wisest, smartest decision I ever made. And he wants that relationship with you as well. Remember that he loves you, and remember that I think each and every one of you are awesome too. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, and I hope you have a fantastic week.